Let's talk about Starmer's response to Elon, because it was very tin-eared. He failed to understand why people were upset by this, and he failed to substantively address any of the real issues, which we discussed in a roundtable on Lotus.com, and what we thought would be the consequence of this. And so go and watch that for a more detailed analysis than I'm going to give here. I'm just going to go through the events. But this was Keir Starmer's response. And I'm not going to play it because it goes on for about 4 minutes, but it completely misses any of the points, right? So the first thing he says is that Tommy Robinson, he begins with misinformation. He says Tommy Robinson is currently in prison for nearly collapsing a grooming gang case.
I don't think this is why he
That's
is
not
in
why he's in
prison
jail.
right now.
He's currently in jail for contempt of court because he broadcast his documentary re-alleging what he had alleged about the I can't remember the kid's name now, actually. The young man who was allegedly a bully in the school, and he had put together in his documentary the evidence of this, which was denied by the courts. They found him guilty of defaming him, and he had to pay him however much money. And Tommy broadcast this documentary in public, and that was considered contempt of court, and so the Attorney General brought him up and sent him to jail. Well, what I think Keir Starmer is talking about is a previous time Tommy Robinson went to jail 6 years ago, when he was at the Huddersfield case, and he was arrested and locked up. Although in Tommy's perspective, he was asked where can he stand. He asked the police where should he stand. The police told him there, and they decided that he was in fact endangering the court case, and so he ended up going to jail for 13 months.
This sounds a bit...
Yeah, it's all politically motivated. I mean, there were other journalists around doing exactly the same thing, but they were like, "Oh, you're Tommy Robinson. You're going to jail."
You have an area of effect.
Yeah. It's obvious that there's no neutrality in the British state towards Mr. Robinson, right? The entire reason that he is consistently in the headlines is because they have essentially been primed to use him as a totem of working class opposition to the current order.
Yeah.
And so he is systematically discriminated against in lots and lots of different ways. Like, I mean, he's been debanked, he's been deplatformed, he's been banned from going to certain towns.
Yeah.
And he's been like, there was one time where he was in a pub with his family, and the police just arrived, and then essentially marched him out of the city. I can't remember which city it was, like Telford or something. And it was just like, you're not allowed to do that. You can't just do that. But of course they can, because it's him, and he is an outlaw from their perspective. Anyway, he also accused Tommy Robinson of getting, quote, a vicarious thrill from street violence. It's like, I mean, maybe 15 years ago in the EDL, but this seems quite anachronistic, because in the last 5 years, he hasn't, 10 years, I don't think he's done anything that would counter street violence. And the United Kingdom rallies have been totally superb and really well run. I know, because I've been speaking at them. So anyway, it's not like Starmer himself is like some sort of golden boy here. When it comes to this, I mean, Starmer has been accused of snubbing whistleblowers who want to expose the Rotherham grooming gangs. And it's as if Starmer is trying to take ownership of the problem, but it's like, but we know you're not. Yeah. We know you have admitted that, and in fact, this in particular, obviously, dismissing the whistleblowers is a massive problem. But prior to this, in 2012, Starmer just admitted, the Crown Prosecution Service, of whom he was in charge from 2008 to 2012, failed the grooming gangs. 2013, I think it was. But he said after the Rochdale scandal in 2012 broke publicly, the then Director of Public Prosecution said the perpetrators had escaped justice for decades because of the failure of authorities to take the abuse seriously. He had also conceded that the ethnicity of the suspects had been an issue, and that prosecutors failed to understand the nature of the abuse. That's all correct. You don't differ on Tommy Robinson's position on this issue, right?
Yeah.
Keir Starmer and Tommy Robinson have the same point on this, and so. And these comments came after it was revealed that the CPS, under his leadership, had dropped a case against a rape gang despite overwhelming evidence of their guilt.
It's because there's a different narrative.
Yes.
The same people can say that, okay, we agree on this, on statistics regarding crime about certain ethnicities as being overrepresented, but then you're going to have the left saying, yeah, I will circulate these statistics, but I will allow only the narrative that says that they are only due to economic conditions. So I'm going to tax you more to pay for more money so that their crime decreases.
Yes.
It's all a way of how it is integrated into a narrative.
Yeah, we'll go through a few things and then summarize what the essential problem with all of this is. So he then goes on to defend Jess Phillips, saying that she has done 1,000 times more than Tommy Robinson, presumably on the subject of grooming gangs, which is just not true as far as I can tell. She's done nothing.
Just how?
Yeah, exactly. As far as I'm not really sure what Jess Phillips has ever actually done on the grooming gangs, although most recently, in her position and capacity as safeguarding minister, she did reject Oldham Council's request for a government inquiry into the grooming gang in Oldham. Of course, there was one recently arrested and finally prosecuted. The ringleaders prosecuted, but obviously the customers of these gangs are still just at large. But Jess Phillips decided that she didn't want to have anything to do with that. And we discussed this in the roundtable because I think it's honestly probably, I think that Jess Phillips is lazy, and a large part of this is her just going, I don't want to have to do this. But another part of it is I don't want to be incorporated into a narrative that will help the far right. I mean, that's genuinely a concern they have.
It says there, Minister for Safeguarding and Violence Against Women and Girls. Shouldn't she be the first person to ask for a national
inquiry? She should be demanding it.
And not just someone whose name is constantly being appealed to in order to divert attention from what is actually important in this case.
Yeah. You'd think that she'd be leading the charge and saying, no, every single one of these men are going to jail. But of course, Jess Phillips' problem is that her constituency is something like 40% Muslim.
Yeah.
And she only won in her constituency with something like 700 votes.
A very low margin.
To a Muslim independent candidate. And the Labour Party are becoming well aware that, in fact, the Muslim enclaves in Britain can just select their own candidates who will more accurately represent themselves and their opinions on things like Gaza, and won't be engaged in this kind of discourse. And so she's kind of trapped in a place where she can't escape from.
Yes.
Actually. And I would be surprised if she were to win another term in her seat. But anyway, then Keir Starmer moved on saying, well, we've seen this playbook many times, whipping up intimidation and threats of violence, hoping the media will amplify. It's like, okay, but at the time, nobody had seen anything. We were like, right, what is this about? And it seems they were just playing the victim. But they did manage to produce one guy who had sent some malicious communications to Jess Phillips. So one moron who has been rightly arrested. I assume he sent threats. I don't know. Like in this article, they don't tell us what he said to her. So I don't know what the nature of his communications was. I'm just going to take it for granted that they're telling us the truth and that this is exactly as threatening as they make it out to be. But of course, and I'm sure it doesn't need to be stressed, don't send Jess Phillips threatening messages.
Yeah. They say threatening messages, but as you pointed out, they don't say what the threat was. And they don't, I don't know to what extent they describe it as incitement to violence, which is obviously not
They just, they describe it as malicious messages.
But if that is the case and they don't say exactly what it is about them that led to the persecution, they are...
literally they just said, messages sent between April 2024 and January 2025. So it's not like it can be reasonably asserted that these messages are a consequence of Elon Musk's tweets either.
Yeah.
These are, again, from a year ago nearly. So they're just fine. I mean, it literally seems very politically convenient where it's like, oh no, we need to get this guy now so we can say that Jess Phillips is in fact the victim of Elon Musk's highlighting of the grooming gang issue that she is taking no part in accepting. I mean, with the Oldham Council thing, she literally is saying, no, you can just do the inquiry yourself. The government's going to have no part in it. It's like, but why? Like, why wouldn't you want to if you were the Minister for Safeguarding Women and Girls? Like, it just seems to me that would be entirely the only job you have, is to look into these cases.
But sadly, we see a pattern across Europe and the West, I think. When we have crime committed by members of groups that the left considers to be oppressed, in fact, they consider them their allies at any given moment, they isolate it. And they say it's an isolated incident and no one will infer any pattern from it. Whereas if it's crime committed by a person from the other side, from someone who is a member of a group they don't consider to be their allies, they're projecting patterns on it, like far-right pandemic haunting Europe.
Yeah. And it's very interesting how this guy was only charged over the weekend.
Yes.
So they knew these messages had been sent a year ago nearly, but it's only when Elon Musk starts tweeting about this. So like, right, grab him, charge him. He's threatening Jess Phillips. She's the victim. This is a far-right narrative. Look, you're trying to threaten MPs. It's like, sorry, I'm not buying it. I'm just not buying it. I think this is entirely too conveniently timed. I mean, obviously punish this idiot in whatever way is necessary and allowed under the law, obviously. And maybe this will be a lesson. Don't message politicians with mean things. Yeah. But I don't believe that this has been ginned up by Elon Musk. And he carries on and says, when the poison of the far right leads to serious threats to Jess Phillips and others, in my book, a line has been crossed. It's like, okay, right. So Jess Phillips is now the real victim of the grooming gang scandal. That's where he's arriving at. It's not that she is doing nothing to protect women and girls from being predated on by the grooming gangs. And it's not that she's going to hold any accountability in her position as a member of the government or historically as someone who has made it culturally difficult to address this issue as part of the ruling sort of left-wing elite ideology. No, she's now the victim of it, and therefore you shouldn't talk about it because you're endangering her life when you bring this issue to the fore.
That's just entirely intended to divert attention.
Yes.
Everyone should talk 100% about the operation of the grooming gangs and how it was covered up. Yeah. And instead of that, almost everyone is talking about the far right, about messages to Jess Phillips. And I want to ask you something, because we are listening about threatening. We listen to people from Labour saying that members of Labour have received threatening messages and have been prosecuted. I remember, was it February or April, where Lindsay Hoyle in the UK Parliament said members of Labour MP have received threatening messages and threats against them. I don't remember anyone prosecuted for that.
No, and you could see the palpable sense of fear from Hoyle as well. And these were threats that were coming from a specific community as well, not of course far right threats. The palpable sense of fear, and he literally said, "I don't want any of you to turn up dead," basically. Yes. And it was like, okay, well, Anyway, so going back on to Keir Starmer, he says, quote, "We have to base our debate on facts and truth, not lies," which is a deeply ironic thing considering he began with an untruth about why Tommy Robinson was in jail, and he's obscuring the fact that these messages were not sent as a response to Elon Musk's tweets. They were clearly sent prior to that. So he's begun with lies. And he says, not only on those who are so desperate for attention that are prepared to debase themselves in their country. Is he referring to Jess Phillips there? Feels like he might be. "This government will get on with the job of protecting victims, including child sex abuse, mandatory reporting, accelerating the process. But what I won't tolerate is this discussion and debate based on lies." Okay, well, you're the one lying. But if it wasn't for Elon Musk bringing this to the fore, if it wasn't for Tommy Robinson and others bringing this subject front and center, you would have just let this go.
Exactly. And misinformation requires people talking about something, whereas the main issue here was silence.
Yes.
The only way to avoid speaking something that is inaccurate, whether intentionally or not, is to be silent about it. The main problem here was silence about the operation of the grooming gangs.
Yes.
That's why they're diverting attention yet again on when they're talking about misinformation.
And they absolutely would prefer you not to talk about this subject. Yeah. This is exactly their position.
And that's why they are mad at Elon Musk, because he has a reach other people don't.
Yes, and so they're taking all of the dirty tactics that they can and throwing them at the wall to see what can stick. For example, they're trying to weaponize the grooming gang victims against Elon Musk. So as you can see here, they've decided to find a group of victims of gender-based violence who have criticized Elon Musk for his attack on Jess Phillips, saying that she had devoted her life for fighting for women and girls. In a letter shared with The Guardian, so is not public. It's not public. So it's a letter they've written and sent to The Guardian. They haven't posted it publicly, as far as I'm aware. So, including 3 survivors of the Telford sexual abuse scandal, they came to the Labour MP's defence and said that there was no one in public life who has done more to support the victims. It's like, sure, that's... Okay, so you've got 7 women, 3 of whom are Telford survivors. We don't know who they are. They obviously have a political position. But the thing is, there are other people who are also survivors of the grooming gangs, such as Sammy Woodhouse here, who is completely on side with Elon Musk, who is completely in defense of Elon Musk, saying thank you so much for bringing this to mainstream attention when they've done everything they can to sweep it under the rug. And I mean, you get people like Charlie Peters who have also spoken to survivors of the grooming gangs, and he's, as he says here, I've asked some survivors of the abuse gangs for their reaction to Starmer's line, calling that those calling for an inquiry are just jumping on the bandwagon amid the poison of the far right. I can't print anything that I've been told so far, just pure anger. One survivor from Rotherham told me, quote, victims all over deserve to know why the true extent of why we were abused and who cover it up. It's so easy to keep blaming the far right every single time this issue comes up. We need to know the truth across the country. Another victim gets in touch. Demanding an inquiry into child abuse is not jumping on the bandwagon of far right. Refusing what we clearly need is appalling and unacceptable. Children live with the damage for years. Hiding the problem is not fixing it. Facing the problem will. So this, again, is a kind of disgraceful tactic. So, oh, well, 7 unnamed victims of this have come forward to defend Jess Phillips and attack Elon Musk over it. It's like, why are you weaponizing these people?
Because this seems to me to be suggesting that they care much more about their narrative than about people.
Well, that's exactly what this is. So what has happened here is a closing of ranks of the liberal elite in Britain. The second Elon Musk started saying, hey, actually, I think that maybe dealing with these child rape gangs is something that actually should be the paramount issue that any government in Britain should face and crack down on, what they decided was that he was a foreigner and he wasn't allowed to comment. And in fact, this was a threat to the liberal hegemony of Britain, their particular narrative, as you say. And they have literally become Little Englanders xenophobes over it because it's Elon Musk. If it was anyone else speaking about a different subject, they would have absolutely nothing to say on this issue.
Exactly. Yeah.
So just as a quick finishing point on this one, apparently Reform are going to hold the full public inquiry themselves. Raising the money won't be a problem, which is a good start. And I think it is worth noting that the Conservatives did set up a task force in 2023, which did arrest many of the ringleaders of these grooming gangs. But that just goes to show you that it was only 2 years ago that they were still operating and that no action had really been taken and that this needed to be done. So, I mean, this should have been done back in 2011. When it became a public scandal and that everyone found out about it. And it's not like there haven't been plenty of inquiries since. Like, we're going to go through some of what the inquiries have discovered, in fact, in a minute, which should have justified this kind of action. And again, this is the bare minimum, right? Just to be clear, this is the absolute bare minimum that was done under the Sunak premiership. That it should have been done a decade before with a lot more, honestly, a lot more bloody vigour.
If you would like to watch the full uncut version that is also uncensored, head on over to lotuseaters.com to find out more.